So, as most of you know, we've been doing a UV study since 3 years now. It's an ongoing project. We will definitely have to work more on this, especially probably do more measurements, more exposure of webbings in different spaces. So just a short recap. The main part of the UV study happened on the top of this mountain here. It's very well known for doing research at high altitude. So basically one of the problems is in general with webbing, we don't have too much data on it, at least consistent data. We've done several talks now at several safety events. Here's one linked, which is more in detail. I'll go through a bit quicker here. So in general, the question always is, when is the breaking strength reduced too much for highline use? And how can we determine on when a piece of webbing needs to be retired? So there are several factors for reduction of breaking strength. Here, just a couple listed, and with quite a few of them, we have a problem that they are not really visible, meaning dirt, chemicals, UV radiation is often not visible, and for example, also repeated use is not necessarily visible. Short recap on our webbing standard. These are our webbing standard classes. This type C has nothing to do with pink tube type C. In ISA standards, this is a strength criteria. So everything above 22 kilonewton MBS, we consider a type C webbing. So these will be, in general, mostly nylon webbings. It's only nylon webbings, freestyle webbings very often. We don't approve any polyester webbings under type C. The weakest polyester webbing we approve is more than 26 kilonewton, and the weakest high-tech webbing we consider is 30 plus kilonewton, so type A. So manufacturers send in their webbing to an independent testing lab. We get those values back, and then we hand out the label according to the strength class the webbing lands in. Important thing within the standard, and this is also openly available in the ISA system standard, is the recommended lifetime for webbings. So webbings cannot be used forever. They have to be retired, at least specific types of webbings. And you can already see here, oh, I just see this is actually the old graph. Huh? Yeah. So this one has been revised. I'm just gonna, while I'm talking, I'm gonna get you the new one. So this is actually the status we had before we did the UV tests. And we had to get a little bit more conservative on these values. And you'll see right now, as soon as I have it open, how it looks now. 1 second. So as I said, the biggest difference is that we're not certifying polyester anymore under 26 kilonewton. We actually don't certify high-tech webbings anymore under 30 kilonewton.
I'm not sharing the new one.
No, I'm doing, 1 second. And the new one you should be seeing now. New one. Okay. So the biggest differences are those gray blocks that you see, not certified as single webbings. And you see the polyester has disappeared, and also ultra low stretch and all other are not being certified as type C anymore. This is the newest version of the webbing standard. So the plan always was to do 3 locations. One we did, Jungfraujoch, which is the high altitude. The weathering chamber is still a big plan of ours, but we haven't figured out how to pay for it. And undefined, it means that right now we're working on a new location to actually double check our current measurements. So start the whole test over again and see if we get the same results. Quick overview how such UV measurements look like. So this is like the special device that actually measures UV. And you can see that UV changes as a factor of season. So lowest UV values would be in like here in this case in European winter, and highest in European summer. So there's not so many such UV collection devices around, and we chose the Jungfraujoch spot because they have such a UV measurement device. So this was the location. The actual location our webbings were hanging were here in this red circle. This is how it looks a little up closer, and you can already see one problem, which actually turned out to be an actual problem. And there's avalanches coming from above in the winter. And actually, 2 of our sample kits were taken down by an avalanche. So we got a diminished data set on that. This is what it looks like after installing the first batch of webbings in this wall. Here with Philip on the picture from above. So you can see there's these wooden frames. There's webbings which are not tensioned, but they're just nailed to the frame or screwed actually. They basically stick on this rockfall net attached above the cliff. Okay, this is what such a accelerated weathering tester looks like, which we're still trying to organize to get basically differentiation between what exposure to real life conditions does compared to a controlled setup in the lab. Here are just some details on how these things look inside. So they work with xenon lamps, which produce artificial UV. Okay, so these are the webbings we actually tested. We tried to get different weaves, so tube, core webbing, flat webbings, different materials, obviously, different strength classes as well. And these are just a close-up of how the frames looked like. So basically what we did is we, after certain time intervals, we took down the frames and measured them. So per measurement interval, we have 3 measurements per webbing, which is quite a lot of samples that we had to break test. And I'm not going to go through this in detail. So here, these are some similar results that have been done in the past with rope. And you can see they have like certain test intervals. And these are actually the test intervals we then tried to follow to also have some comparison to these tests. So, interesting part, results. I'm going to show 2 graphs, and this is pretty much the state of where we are right now. So what we're seeing here is on the left, the breaking strength in kilonewton. This is the average breaking strength, so not the minimum breaking strength, average breaking strength over 3 samples. So each dot you see on here is actually 3 samples. Unfortunately, I said 2 batches got lost. One of the batches would have been between around the 200-day mark, and another one between the 400 and 800-day mark. So these 2 batches actually got lost. So we have only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 data sets available to show you here. Actually 7, because there's a 0 measurement a second. Okay, so I think the general way you can look at this is you can look at the bluish colors and the reddish colors, meaning it's one or no, it's actually, there's no exception. So the bluish colors are the nylon webbings and the reddish colors are the polyester webbings. And you can already see in the way the graphs appear that there's a trend that all the reddish colors, they have a steep exponential curve at the beginning, or like breaking strength drops off really quickly within a very short period of time. and then it kind of stabilizes over time. So you can see 3 different strength classes here, core 2 being the strongest with breaking strength of 44 kilonewton when it was new, diminishing down to about 30 kilonewton. And you can see webbing, which started off around 26-ish kilonewtons, the polar, which ended up around 17 kilonewton after almost 800 days of exposure. So quite an extreme decline in the beginning for polyester webbings, independent if they were tube or flat or core mantle. So this basically just shows how quick polyester is affected by UV mostly, I'd say. Of course, there's all other factors in there as well, but I think this is probably more a UV trend. Then in comparison to that, all the bluish colors show more or less linear decline of breaking strength. And here, what can be seen clearly is that there's obviously different steepnesses of these curves or of these lines. And you can see that basically what we found here are 2 different angles. So there's seems to be different nylon involved in this. It's the only way I can explain this. So not exactly the same type of nylon. So in this specific case, Red 2, Rubber Band, and Sonic all show a similar steepness with, for example, the Rubber Band going also all the way down to about 17 kilonewton within almost 800 days. So a bit special is then the Sigma X, which is type C-ish nylon tubular webbing from Slackline DE. This shows a trend we have already seen with, for example, pink tube. Very similar webbings actually, starting off around 22, 23 kilonewton, and then actually having a very slow decline down to, in this case, about 18 kilonewton. So what makes the difference here, we don't really know yet, I'd say, but there seems to be different materials being used, different nylon material being used to show these different steepnesses. So this is kind of the results, and another way to show these results is with percentage compared to what the webbing held when it was new. So what you can see here is actually just shows very similar things. What it just shows is that some webbings here, notably the polar from Aki, has steep decrease, and then it's basically goes all the way down to about 60% of its breaking strength within almost 800 days. So even here within, let's say, the polyester webbings, we can see some differences. One could think, yeah, that core would have, because of its thickness and core mantle structure, has less of a decline than, for example, Octopussy. But here again, hard to say from the outside why we see these different results. Very notably, you can see the difference in the steepness of the lines from a Red Tube, Rubber Band, and Sonic compared to Sigma X. Sigma X here performs better in terms of percentage. So these are the 2 main graphs we can show right now. So some conclusions so far. Probably more can be drawn from this. We haven't digged into the results in full detail yet, but basically we can see that polyester degrades fast in the beginning, and then it seems to flatten out. There are some differences there. And we can see, this is something we already knew, is that nylon continually seems to degrade. So really after these 900 days. So this is really much, or 800 days, depending really much on the type of webbing we use or the original breaking strength of it. Some go faster, some go slower, and what the difference is, we don't really know it. So another way to say this is you cannot really see from the outside how much a webbing has degraded, especially with nylon. Seems to be really important to know the age, or so in other words, how many days it has been rigged outside. And there's many factors in degradation we don't know yet. In some cases, probably not just UV, which is relevant. And there have been some studies in Australia showing a notable difference between degradation in cities and outside of cities. So maybe chemicals in the air together with UV play a role. But these are really difficult things to figure out at the end of the day. So this is basically it. This is what I wanted to show you. And I'm sure there's now questions on this whole topic, and I'm ready to answer those together with the help of my friends here.
So my question is, what would make a good spot to do other tests, I guess? So do you need to absolutely be at 3,000 meter, or is it needs to have a weather station with the UV measurement thing? That's the most important thing, I guess.
Yeah. So this is a good question, because like one of the logistically horrible things is to go up and down this mountain all the time. Costs lots of money and effort to do that, and then send it to the lab to test. So for me, it's clear that the next round of testing will not happen further than 100 meters from the braking test machine. So in other words, just wherever the brake test machine is, this is where we would do our next set of UV measurements. And talking to some UV experts, they say that actually simulating UV over a map, so over an area, is actually quite simple, and it does not vary that much. So you can kind of give rough estimates nicely on how UV is in a certain space on a map. So like having very precise UV measurements is probably not going to help us that much. So like the resolution we get from just simulations, UV simulations, is probably good enough to actually say something about this. This is something we learned, so it has to be logistically easier, accessible. Ideally, we are on the roof of the building that has the braking test machine in it. And obviously it shouldn't be like a spot which is in the shadow all the time. Something like that doesn't make sense. But in my opinion, from learning here, it doesn't have to be on 4,000 meters. So it can be somewhere down. I mean, obviously, there's big differences between where you are on the globe. So let's say in New Zealand or maybe parts of South America, there's completely different UV values. And I think what we still have to do is compare these UV values to then what we actually have. Because there's maybe in some countries, there's maybe one or two actual UV measurement device in the whole country, which is precise. So, but once you have that, you can kind of extrapolate to that area. And I think, we just have to find out if we get more precise data on UV around the globe.
And could the requirement of the thing also of the country you are in?
Yes. So August asked the question if the requirements for UV should actually depend on where you live in the globe, on the globe. So maybe, honestly, we don't know this yet. I cannot answer it. I mean, we need to. Yeah. So are some Type C nylon, for example, tube freestyle webbings should have a even less lifetime than half a year? It's really something we don't know. So this could be something that we find out in the future, that we actually need different lifetimes. Okay, any other questions concerning UV damage? Just shoot in.
Thomas? It's Eduardo. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Very good. When you break test after the exposure, you do like 3 tests each sample or just 1?
Yes, so we did for each sample 3 tests, yeah.
Okay,
and
good.
then the displayed point you see here on this graph is always the average.
It's the average.
Yes, it's not the calculated MBS, yeah.
So simple average, you don't use the 3 sigma. So
no, not for this, because
okay.
3 sigma is already difficult enough for new webbings. If you then add unknown factors like UV, humidity cycling, temperature cycling, all this kind of stuff, the sigma will just increase to a level that doesn't make sense anymore here. So the way we look at actually sigma or MBS in general, especially 3 sigma with webbing, is that webbings are not simple products, they're very complex products. In other words, 3 sigma is a very tricky thing to do with complex products. So
yeah, I know very well. And on new webbing, it's not that much, but it's still, especially when you go lower, 22 kilonewton with 3 sigma, it's easy to get really below the 20, the safety factor, the minimum.
Yes, exactly. So yeah. So for those who don't know this, but like 3 sigma is a typical method, or MBS calculations are a typical way to mitigate for variation you have in production, for example. And if you have like steel products, shackles or weblocks, it's actually easier to get the measurements of the breaking that are really near to each other, so close measurements. As soon as you get into more complex products where small pieces
like
are involved, or like a webbing, where you have tons of influence on how this webbing turns out, it's very complicated to get 3 measurements, breaking strength measurements, which are fairly close to each other.
I know. So thanks for the explanation.
Yes, you're welcome. Any other questions on the UV measurements? So to the manufacturers in here, so we are going to start a new batch of UV measurements sometime this year. So if you're interested to participate, especially for you, Eduardo, maybe Stefan on Red, there is a possibility to send us, I think we need at least 80 meters of webbing for 1 round to Switzerland, and we will basically redo what we already have here and add some new webbings to compare what we measured so far to what we see at the lower altitude. If we are lucky, we can pay some accelerated weathering in a machine, and then we also have to comparison from like near outside values to like some precisely measured values from a machine. So this would be the aim, to start sometime this year, at the end of the year, and let it run for another 2 years, a new batch of results, and also some microscopic analysis of individual samples.
Okay, thanks to inform me, and we will discuss later how to make it work.
Nice, cool. Any other questions on the UV study?